Yeah, it's great to be here today. So I'm going to be talking about some of my work, which is looking at using sediment provenance traces in a new way to try and better constrain Pliocene and kind of Pleistocene sea level contributions. So I thought I'd just start off with a very general overview of the idea of sediment provenance. So I suppose the essential idea is if you've got a continent made up of different rock types, here represented by these different colour rectangles. If you've got an ice sheet sat on it, it's going to flow over it, erode it, transport it offshore, and if you look at the sediment offshore, it's going to reflect a mixture of those rock types. The idea being then if the ice sheet extent changes or erosion patterns change, you're going to have different sediment deposited offshore. So if you look at the sedimentary record, you should be able to say something about how the ice sheet's changed in the past. So the method of reconstructing sediment provenance that I'm going to mention a lot today is neodymium isotopes. But essentially all you need to worry about for this talk is that different rocks have different values, in this case epsilon neodymium values. And you can look at these in rocks and look at them in sediments and say something about erosion in the past. And a really nice example of where this works really well is the Wilkesville Glacial Basin in East Antarctica. So this study back in 2013, it was a Pliocene section recovered from up here in site U1361. And essentially what you see here is that in cooler intervals in this Pliocene section, we get more negative epsilon neodymium values. And if you look at the rocks on land where these might come from, it matches really nicely with these blue rocks on the coast, which are about where the modern coastline sits. So you can say that probably the ice sheet extent was somewhat similar to today in this region. However, if you look at the warmer intervals in this Pliocene section, we get less negative epsilon neodymium values. And again, if you go back to the rocks on land and think about where that might come from, it matches really well with these green rocks, the Farrar Group rocks, which lie inland of the present-day coastline. So this was used to infer that the ice sheet margin retreated in this part of the East Antarctic ice sheet in the Pliocene. And in fact, we actually also see similar things in the Pleistocene, in some Pleistocene interglacials at the same site. So this is the modern sort of baseline, and then some Pleistocene interglacials we see what's inferred to be retreat. However, it's not really that straightforward, so you can't necessarily directly go and translate your epsilon neodymium value at the core site offshore into an amount of retreat. For instance, it's hard to differentiate between, say, retreat of the ice sheet margin, like on the left here, versus just faster flow inland, increasing erosion rates further inland, because that's what we're really recording is where erosion was happening and transport happening in the past. So it's kind of hard to say, yeah, directly translate this ice sheet margin behavior into an epsilon neodymium value. And similarly, it's then hard to say something quantitative about the amount of retreat, whether it's a small or larger amount of retreat. So to try and do something better than just sort of looking at a map and looking at the values in the core site, we thought it'd be nice to try and develop a MATLAB program that basically takes a map of subglacial epsilon neodymium values derived from geophysical data and measurements of rocks on land, and then use the output of an ice sheet model, so particularly the basal velocities and basal shear stress to get some idea of the erosion rates and also the directions of sediment transport by the ice sheet. And then to get from the ice sheet margin to core sites offshore to make some sort of estimates of how oceans transport sediment beyond when they enter the marine realm. And essentially use this to create a map or predict a map of offshore epsilon neodymium values. So that's what I've got here on the left is just our prediction for the modern ice sheet. And what we did is we tuned this a bit and compared it to some modern core top values. So here on the right here, I've just got a scatter plot where our model predictions against the core top measurements. And hopefully you agree it does a pretty good job. There's a few regional exceptions, but particularly in the areas of where there's active volcanoes close by, but generally it does a pretty good job. I haven't got time to talk about any of the detailed methods of this, but it's in a preprint in geoscientific model development. I'm very happy to chat about it later. So once this was done, we started applying it to some Pliocene ice sheet model simulations. And so this figure, there's quite a lot to unpack here, so I'll go through it bit by bit. But essentially what I've done here is predicted each dot here represents an ice sheet model or a time slice from an ice sheet model. And what I've done here is just pull out the epsilon neodymium value at the site of U1361, so offshore the Wilkesville Glacial Basin. And that's plotted on this axis, and then on here, there's just the different ice volumes for these different ice sheet model simulations. So moving from right to left, this is the modern ice sheet value. And you can see it reaches the sort of range that we see in cooler intervals where the ice sheet margin is eroding these more coastal rocks. But then as we step back, these grey circles here, these represent an ice sheet model simulation where we have West Antarctic ice sheet collapse, but the Wilkesville Glacial Basin is intact. So that's the West Antarctic ice sheet collapse, is the reduction in ice volume. And what we see is we get a shift in sediment provenance. So you can get some shift in sediment provenance without retreating the ice sheet margin, it seems. But critically, this doesn't reach this range of values that we see in Pliocene warm periods and some Pleistocene interglacials represented by this red shaded region. So to get here, we have to retreat the margin, the Wilkesville Glacial Basin. So that's what these black dots are. These are simulation time slices where the margin has retreated. So, yes. But a kind of interesting thing to fall out of this was actually then, if you go further, if you really retreat the margin to the Wilkesville Glacial Basin, you go really far inland. What we actually found is that there's a reversal in this relationship. And critically, this is something we don't observe in the record. So I guess what we'd expect to see would be evidence for very warm conditions, but also very negative epsilon neodymium values. And this is something that we don't observe. So we think this can help place an upper limit on how much retreat into the Wilkesville Glacial Basin likely occurred in the Pliocene, which will ultimately help constrain ice sheet models. You're probably thinking, well, why would you see that reversal in this relationship? It actually kind of makes sense if you look at the geology. So here's, again, quite a schematic view, but I've plotted here some striped regions, which is this Farrar group, the green rock earlier, which is less negative. But it's actually bordered by the Delhi cratons. This is a very old rock which has got very negative epsilon neodymium values. And here I've just plotted up two of the simulations we use. So one with a slightly retreated Wilkesville Glacial Basin, one with quite a lot of retreat. And in the top here I've just plotted the difference in relative erosion rates between these two. And you can see these red areas are where there's faster erosion in this second scenario. And you can see you get these ice streams sort of developing along the border in India Delhi craton. So it seems like that's what's causing this reversal, is actually if you go really far inland, you end up eroding these really negative rocks over here, and that causes this reversal in the relationship. And we do actually see this at another core site in the Miocene, so I think there's good evidence this is a real thing. So I've talked a lot about the Wilkesville Glacial Basin, but this method is predicting epsilon neodymium values all around West Antarctica, where I've done the literature compilation. It's not just the Wilkesville Glacial Basin. So you could easily look at other core sites. You could look at different ice sheet model simulations, so look at other time intervals. So it's called tracing Antarctic sediment provenance, and we could adapt it to work for other than provenance proxies. And it can easily use, because it's written separate to the ice sheet model, it could be easily used to apply to other ice sheet models if you've got the correct variables saved. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about that if anyone's interested. So just to conclude, I think we can successfully predict offshore epsilon neodymium values and achieve sort of sensible range in provenance shifts. Secondly, it seems like ice sheet margin retreat is required to reach the values that we observe at this IDP site. You can't just have erosion further inland to explain all the changes we see. And a new thing is that we think we can place a useful upper limit on how much retreat into the Wilkesville Glacial occurred in periods like the Pliocene, which will ultimately help constrain ice sheet models. The next steps are to use the results of some high-resolution ocean modelling to look at how sediment might travel around the embayments that are created when you get a loss of parts of the ice sheet. So Liz has got a poster on this that you should check out if you've not seen it already. But yeah, thanks very much.
So that was perfectly on time, so you have time for questions.
Jim, I just want to say spectacular talk. Thank you very much, and it's close to my heart, of course. So a couple of very quick fire questions. Well, what is that upper bound in terms of equivalent sea level that could come out? And secondly, you'll be aware there's some far-field sea level records that would agree that quite a bit of the marine-based ice sheet went in the Pliocene.
Yeah, so I've not put any sort of exact numbers here yet on purpose because I think some of the details still need to be ironed out. But it's something like we see at the moment getting something like a 9 or 10 metre sea level equivalent ice sheet, which I think matches quite well if you assume all of Greenland's gone with some far-field records. So.
Great stuff, Jim. You're measuring erosion. How are you going to manage, particularly going back further in time, actually unroofing and paleo topographies and paleo rock types that are now missing?
Yeah, that's not really accounted for here. I guess you could change the map that you're starting off with. There's like the subglacial map. But probably within the uncertainties of subglacial geology, it's probably a small impact, I'd have thought.
Fantastic. So I think for the sake of keeping on track with the schedule,